I talked extensively this past year about the silver linings of the pandemic and all the precautions that we got to take, remote working, getting to live wherever you want. I talked about how it's changed our perspective about hygiene. But there is one thing that I really despise, and unfortunately it's gotten worse during the pandemic, and that is our culture of tipping. And I really despise it because I think a lot of the biases we have in this country stem from tipping. I talked about biases against singles. I always feel when I go out as a single guy that I always get turned around really quickly at the restaurants. And I think part of that is people don't expect to get a good tip from me. And last winter, I was ordering from Grubhub because I needed to prepare to go to a meeting. We had a lot of high-risk people, so I quarantined for a week at home, and I was using Grubhub, and I made a mistake. What had happened was, as I was ordering, it asked me how much I wanted to tip. And I just think it's really awkward to put a tip before service had happened, right? I don't know how long how good the service is going to get. If I get my food next week when I'm ordering dinner, I don't want to be tipping ahead of time. I don't know if it's going to show up correctly. Heck, maybe the food might even be contaminated and I get sick right after I eat it, right? It's just really awkward to tip before it happens. So I was thinking I'll put 0 into the Grubhub, and after the food comes, then I'll decide if I want to tip. Well, the funny thing is that, this was Instacart where it happened. The driver, he substituted some of the items. It turned out they were sold out, and the substitution he made didn't work. I have dietary restrictions, and I think the problem was that he wasn't expecting to get a tip. See, I naively thought he would come to the door and I would give him the tip. I forgot. It's 2020. People leave the door and they run for their lives. I forgot about that. See, when I travel to Taiwan, we don't have nearly as big a tipping culture in Taiwan. When I travel to Europe, I don't seem to get the problem of biases against singles because there's no tipping culture. People make what they make at the restaurant. I still tip when I get really good service. One of my favorite tricks, I got into some trouble with this, so I don't do this anymore. When I used to get, I used to love this little, it's almost like a middle finger. I would get really atrocious service, and I would pay with my credit card, and I would write a negative number as the tip. I would get really bad service to justify doing that. Like, the waiter didn't even care about my table. So I would put a negative number on the tip, and then I would subtract it. Usually, it just shows up as no tip. Sometimes I actually have paid a negative tip. If the waiter isn't paying attention, or maybe he really admits that he made a mistake. I don't know what happens behind the scenes. But I've had times where I put negative $2 as a tip, and it really did take negative $2 off of my tab. And so when I get really atrocious service, I love doing that. Now, the problem is one time I did that, and the waiter was really upset. And he changed it to a positive $2 tip. I looked at my credit card statement, and he had added a $2 tip instead of taking $2 off of the tab. It was a Japanese restaurant where this had happened. And I went up to the manager, and the manager actually speaks Chinese, so I was able to talk to him in Chinese, and it gave us a good rapport. And I explained the bad service that I had gotten and why I had put negative $2. I showed him the receipt, and he said he'll talk to his the waiter about it. And I thought that was that. I used to frequent that restaurant quite a bit, and I never saw that waiter again. I didn't expect the manager to fire him, by the way. I didn't see him again. But I got okay service after that. But a few more times later, I saw the manager again, and he told me that the waiter, it turned out he didn't get fired. He had left the job for something else. But the waiter was very upset that he had gotten reprimanded by the manager over this matter, that he had called the restaurant. This was weeks after he had quit the job. He had called the restaurant saying that he knows where I live and he was going to cause revenge. And so the manager was warning me about that incident. And just goes to show, if we didn't have a tipping culture, I don't think any of this would have transpired. He would have just done his job, and to his best potential, right? Without having to worry about who each person is going to tip based on their personal living situations or their socioeconomics. He wouldn't have to think about all that. There's a lot of prejudice that stems from that. Now, don't get me wrong. I tip when I go to other countries, even when I don't have to. When I'm in Taiwan, I'm not very familiar with Taiwan, and so sometimes if I find a restaurant that can get the ingredients right because I have dietary restrictions, I always tip very well. I was traveling in Warsaw, Poland, one time, and I had an interesting conversation with a waitress. She was telling me where to go when I visit Gdansk, Poland, what part of the beach, and she suggested a couple pickup lines if I wanted to talk to some girls over there. She's a little bit older than me, by the way. And on the last day of the trip, I had my credit cards don't work in Poland, so I was using a lot of cash, and I had a lot of loose change. And on the last day of that trip, I went back to that restaurant, had my normal stuff. She remembers all the ingredients I need to avoid. And I gave her all of the loose change that I had accumulated during a 2-week trip, about 200 or 300 Polish zloty. It was all loose change, but she was very happy about that because that's about as much. She said that was about as much as she makes in a month, and she thought I was crazy. And I told her I'm from the United States. Don't worry about it. I don't have a use for that change anyway. So I tip even when I travel to other countries that don't have a tipping culture, but I don't have to deal with the prejudice. That's what I hope would happen in the United States. Unfortunately, tipping culture has gotten a whole lot worse during this pandemic. Anyway, stop tipping. Thanks for watching.